June 6, 1944. 0552 hours. Wider stands at 62, Omaha Beach. Oberleutnant Heinrich Severloh lifted his binoculars and scanned the English Channel. The morning fog was slowly thinning, peeling back to reveal dull gray water between drifting banks of mist. Then he saw it, and his grip tightened. Ships, not a few, not dozens, hundreds, then more. Severloh adjusted the focus. Try and make sense of what his eyes were telling him. He counted until he reached 300, then stopped. The horizon was no longer a line. It was a continuous mass of steel and smoke, stretching endlessly from east to west. Every few seconds, another shape materialized from the fog. Battleships with towering gun turrets. Destroyers slicing through the swell. Transport vessels riding low, heavy with men and machines. His hands shook as he grabbed the field telephone. Major, he said, his voice breaking. There are ships everywhere. I can't see where they end. The entire horizon is covered. This is not a raid. This is something else. The reply came back calm, but tight with urgency. How many ships, Oberleutnant? Give me an estimate. Severloh looked again. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, troop transports, landing craft by the hundreds, their blunt bows aimed straight at a section of beach. What had once been open sea was now a vast, floating city of metal, extending north and south beyond his field of view. Sir, I can't count them, he said quietly. There are too many. Thousands, perhaps. I have never seen anything like this. No one had. What Severloh was witnessing was the greatest naval force ever assembled. Over 5,000 ships carrying more than 160,000 men across the English Channel, bearing down on the coast of Normandy. There were more ships than Germany had constructed during the entire war. More men than lived in most German cities. More concentrated firepower than any nation had ever brought to bear in a single operation. And every one of them was moving straight toward his sector. Severloh lowered his binoculars and turned to men inside the bunker. They were young. They were watching him closely, waiting for instructions, waiting for confidence, waiting for something he could not provide. In 2 decades of military service, he had never felt such absolute certainty that death was approaching. For 6 months, Severloh had watched the Atlantic Wall turn as a assigned stretch of coast into a carefully engineered killing zone. In April, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself had inspected wider stanza 62. Severloh had stood rigid at attention as the famed Desert Fox reviewed the machine gun emplacements, the overlapping fields of fire, the ammunition reserves. Rommel had given a brief nod of approval. Good positions, Oberleutnant, he had said. When the invasion comes, you will drive them back into the sea. The first 24 hours will decide everything. Severloh had believed him. Every German soldier along the coast had believed him. German intelligence had spent months calculating Allied shipping capacity. The briefings Severloh received were confident, almost reassuring. The Allies, he was told, could not gather more than 1,500 ships for a cross-channel assault. The largest possible first wave would be around 100,000 men, exactly the scale the Atlantic Wall had been built to defeat. On paper, the numbers made sense. German defenses were expected to kill or disable roughly 30% of the attackers before they reached the sand or shortly after landing. The remainder would be trapped on the beaches, cut off, disorganized, and methodically destroyed by counterattacking panzer divisions. Severloh had run the figures himself. His MG-42 could fire 1,200 rounds per minute. He had 12,000 rounds at his disposal. His firing lanes covered 400 meters of beach, overlapping with neighboring positions. If each burst killed or wounded 5 men, he could personally neutralize 2,000 soldiers before exhausting his ammunition. Against a landing of 100,000 men spread across a 50-mile front, that seemed sufficient. 2,000 casualties from a single machine gun nest would matter. But now, staring at the horizon, Severloh understood the truth. Every assumption had been wrong. German intelligence had projected 1,500 ships. What he was seeing was closer to 5,000. They had predicted a landing force of 100,000 men. The reality was 160,000. The planners believed the assault would strike 1 or 2 beaches. Instead, the enemy was coming ashore on 5. Every estimate, every formula, every comforting briefing, wrong. And in less than an hour, those thousands of ships would be off his shoreline. Severlo was still trying to comprehend the scale of the fleet when he heard it, a deep, unbroken rumble rolling down from the sky, growing louder by the second. He looked up as the cloud layer began to tear apart. Through the openings came aircraft, not scores, not hundreds. The sky was packed with them. Bombers and fighters streamed toward the French coast in tight formations, wave after wave, their engines merging into a single deafening roar. The noise was so overwhelming that men inside the bunker had to yell to communicate. The radio operator thrust a message into his hands. It was from Corps headquarters. Mass enemy air activity reported along the entire coastal sector. Estimated 2,000 aircraft over the Normandy region. All units are to hold positions and await further orders. Severlo watched as his anti-aircraft crews opened fire with their 20mm flak guns. Bright tracer rounds climbed into the sky and vanished into the dense formations overhead. 2 aircraft were reported hit, 2 out of thousands. It changed nothing. For every plane that fell, dozens more replaced it. The air attacks continued without interruption. At 0615 hours, the naval bombardment began. The bunkers shuddered violently as the first shells from offshore battleships slammed into German defenses. The sound defied comparison, a constant, crushing thunder that seemed to pass straight through his body, making the concrete itself tremble. Severlo tried to count the gun flashes along the horizon. He reached 60 and gave up. There were simply too many. Through his binoculars, he could make out the shapes. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers. More warships than entire navies could deploy anywhere on the planet, all of them aiming their guns at a stretch of sand. His company commander, Hauptmann Helmut Firking, appeared in the bunker doorway. Dust coated his uniform, his face drained of color. "Severlo," he said, "I've just received confirmation from division headquarters." He paused. "This is not a diversion. This is not a feint. This is the main assault." Severlo turned back toward the sea. The ships looked closer now. Landing craft were peeling away from the larger vessels, organizing into attack formations. "How many men?" he asked. Hauptmann Firking's reply sounded empty, almost stunned. "New intelligence estimates at least 150,000 troops in the first wave, possibly more. They're coming ashore on 5 beaches at once: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, a front nearly 50 miles wide. The German 352nd Infantry Division defending this section of Omaha Beach had just 12,000 men. The Americans were landing more than 10 times that number. On this stretch of sand, Severlo wrapped his hands around his machine gun and waited. At 0625 hours, the first wave of landing craft closed in. Through his binoculars, the boats were unmistakable now, flat-bottom Higgins craft, each crammed with roughly 30 soldiers, their ramps still locked upright as they surged toward the beach obstacles German engineers had spent months embedding in the sand. 800 meters, 600, 400. He could see the Americans clearly, young men gripping their rifles, helmets pulled down against the spray. At 0630 hours, the ramps dropped. Severlo opened fire. His MG-42 spat 1,200 rounds per minute, 20 bullets every second. He swept the shoreline exactly as he had been trained, left to right, then back again. Men fell in the surf, on the sand, against the seawall. Some were cut down before they could step off the ramps. Others managed 10 meters before collapsing. For the first 2 hours, it appeared the defensive plan was succeeding. Thousands of American bodies lay scattered across Omaha Beach. Landing craft burned in the shallows. Fuel tanks ignited by tracer fire. Survivors crouched behind obstacles and fallen comrades, pinned in place, unable to advance, unable to withdraw. Severlo continued firing. The barrel of his weapon glowed red. The cooling water inside the jacket boiled. Still, the Americans kept coming. At 0830 hours, his assistant gunner shouted over the noise of battle, "Aber Lieutenant, we're almost out of ammunition. The barrel is overheating." Severlo had fired more than 12,000 rounds in 2 hours. He reached for the field telephone and requested resupply. The answer from battalion headquarters was blunt. No ammunition could be spared. All remaining reserves were being held for the counterattack, but the counterattack would never come. The Panzer divisions meant to throw the Americans back into the sea had been kept in reserve by Hitler's personal order. They were still waiting for confirmation, waiting to be told this was a real invasion and not another deception. In that moment, Severlo understood something that would shape the rest of his life. He was killing Americans faster than they could move forward, and it did not matter. For every landing craft he destroyed, 2 more replaced it. For every soldier he cut down, 10 more followed behind. He had already fired 12,000 rounds. He had struck hundreds of men, yet thousands more had come ashore in the same span of time. The arithmetic of industrial warfare had erased the importance of individual effort. By 1,000 hours, his machine gun failed completely. The barrel had overheated and warped. The receiver had cracked. The bolt was locked solid, fuse in place. The weapon was finished. He set aside and picked up his Carabiner 98K rifle. 5 rounds against an army. He scanned the beach through binoculars fractured by blast damage. The tide had risen, washing over the bodies of the first assault wave, but the stream of landing craft did not slow. More than 200 boats were approaching the shore at that moment alone. Each carried roughly 30 men. 6,000 soldiers were moving toward his position right now. Beyond them, something new appeared at the edge of the sea. Huge vessels with flat hulls and massive bow doors. LSTs, tank landing ships. Severlo watched as the first one grounded itself on the beach. Its doors swung open. Sherman tanks rolled directly onto the sand. One, then another, armor pouring ashore in an unbroken flow, like water from an open valve. His company commander staggered up beside him, his uniform torn and stained with blood from shrapnel wounds. "Severlo," he said, "we've lost the forward positions. The Americans have broken through the seawall in 3 places. They're moving inland." "How many tanks?" Severlo asked. Hauptmann Firking looked back toward the beach. "I've counted 40 Shermans in our sector alone, and more LSTs are still coming." Severlo did the math. His battalion had begun the day with 800 men. The Americans had already landed 30,000 on Omaha Beach, with another 20,000 visible offshore, waiting to come in. What Severlo did not know, what no German soldier on that beach would have known, was the true scale of the system behind the invasion. American shipyards had produced 4,126 landing craft in just 2 years. For every vessel German guns destroyed, 3 more were already on their way across the Atlantic. At the Kaiser shipyards in California, Liberty ships were rolling off the waves every 42 days. Ships that would have taken German yards 6 months to build. This was not a battle of courage or tactics anymore. It was a battle of production. The 5,000 ships spread across the horizon represented more total tonnage than Germany had produced over the course of the entire war. Severlo was no longer fighting an army. He was fighting an industrial machine, one capable of replacing losses faster than he could ever cause them on Omaha Beach. For every German defender, 40 American soldiers had landed. By 1200 hours, the 352nd Infantry Division had ceased to function as a coherent force. Severlo's regiment had lost 70% of its men in just 6 hours of combat. They had fought with exceptional determination. They had inflicted devastating casualties. IT had changed nothing. A T-1,400 hours. Severlo received an order he never thought he would hear. Withdraw. His position was encircled. His ammunition was gone. His machine gun was ruined. Of the 32 men who had manned Wider Stanza 62 that morning, only 11 were still alive. Severlo assembled the survivors and began pulling back inland through the communication trenches. As he left, American troops were already moving into his bunker, setting up their own machine guns in the very emplacements he had held for 6 hours. As he climbed the bluff overlooking Omaha Beach, Severlo paused and turned for one last look. What he saw made something clear to him with absolute certainty. The war was already decided. The stretch of beach he had defended that morning had become an American city. Thousands of vehicles were arranged in orderly lines along the sand. Trucks, jeeps, tanks, artillery. Engineers were laying prefabricated metal roadways across the dunes. Military police directed traffic through makeshift intersections. Field hospitals operated beneath canvas tents, treating the wounded as more men continued to arrive. And the ships did not stop coming at 1,600 hours. Severlo witnessed something he could not immediately understand. Enormous concrete structures were being towed toward the shore by tugboats, floating blocks the size of apartment buildings, moving slowly but relentlessly toward the beach. His company commander stood beside him, staring at the same unbelievable sight. "What are those?" Severlo asked. Hauptmann Firking shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "Some kind of floating harbor. They're building a port right here, right now." Severlo finally understood what he was truly facing. The Americans were not merely landing an army. They were putting an entire industrial system ashore. They were assembling harbors while his division was still falling back. They were laying roads while German soldiers were still bleeding in the trenches at 1800 hours. As the sun dipped toward the horizon over Normandy, Severlo halted on a ridgeline 3 kilometers inland. From that height, the English Channel was still visible. What he saw confirmed every fear he had carried since dawn. The sea was still filled with ships. Hundreds, thousands. After 12 straight hours of unloading men and equipment, the armada looked no smaller than it had that morning. His company commander joined him on the ridge. Division headquarters reports the Americans have landed 160,000 men across 5 beaches today, he said. They expect another 200,000 within 48 hours. Severlo made the final calculation in his head. Germany had deployed roughly 12,000 defenders in this sector. The Americans were landing 360,000 men in 2 days, 30 Americans for every German. "We can't win this," Severlo said quietly. "Can we even stop them?" Firking stared at the endless movement on the horizon. Ships still unloading, still arriving. "No, Severlo, we can't. This isn't a battle. This is American industry coming ashore on French soil, and no army on earth can defeat that." As night fell over Normandy, Severlo and the remnants of his company continued their withdrawal inland. Behind them, the beaches glowed with the lights of thousands of vehicles. The Americans worked without pause, unloading supplies, assembling equipment, building roads, turning captured ground into a functioning machine of war. Severlo walked in silence. His rifle was empty. His uniform was torn. His hands still trembled from 12 hours of nonstop combat. Out of the darkness, other German soldiers appeared, survivors from shattered units, the wounded, men who had seen the same impossible armada and drawn the same conclusion. A young corporal from the 716th Division fell into step beside him. "Oberleutnant, how long did you hold your position?" 6 hours, Severlo replied. "I fired until my machine gun melted. Then I fired my rifle until I had no ammunition left." The corporal looked at him with something close to awe. "You must have killed many of them." Severlo slowed, then stopped. He turned and looked back toward the coast, where the glow of American lights lit the horizon like a false sunrise. "I fired 12,000 rounds this morning," he said. "I hit many men. How many, I will never know. And while I was firing, 80,000 more landed on that beach. I destroyed landing craft for 6 hours, and they built a harbor while I was shooting." He turned away and resumed walking inland, away from the beaches, away from the 5,000 ships that had changed everything. The Americans had lost more than 2,000 men on Omaha Beach alone, the bloodiest of 5 landing zones. The German defenders had fought with exceptional discipline and courage. From prepared positions, they had inflicted terrible losses against an amphibious assault, and none of it had mattered. Before the sun set that day, the Allies had already replaced every casualty they had suffered. In a single day, they put more tanks ashore than Germany could manufacture in an entire month. Even before the fighting fully ended, they had begun constructing permanent harbors. Rommel had insisted the invasion had to be crushed within 48 hours. Severlo now understood that 48 hours had never been realistic. The Americans had arrived with such overwhelming strength that no counterattack could have forced them back. Not in 2 days, not in 2 weeks, not ever. The 5,000 ships Heinrich Severloh saw on the horizon on June 6, 1944 were not merely ships. They were a declaration, a statement that American industry had entered the war directly, and nothing could stand in its path. In the weeks that followed, Severloh continued fighting as Allied forces pushed deeper into France. In September 1944, for months after watching the Armada appear offshore, he was captured by American troops. By that time, the Allies had landed more than 2 million men in France, along with 500,000 vehicles and over 4 million tons of supplies. The beaches of Normandy had become the largest logistics operation the world had ever seen, a demonstration of industrial organization on a scale German commanders had never imagined. For decades afterward, Severloh struggled with what he had witnessed and what he had done on that beach. He grappled with the cold arithmetic of industrial warfare, a system where individual actions could be both deadly and ultimately irrelevant. "I knew in that moment," he would later say, "that we could kill them all day and it would not matter. They would keep coming until none of us were left to fire. We were fighting soldiers. They were fighting with factories. That is not a fight any soldier can win. That is industry." D-Day was not decided by generals. It was not decided by tactics. It was decided in shipyards in California, factories in Michigan, and an industrial system capable of building 5,000 ships, landing 160,000 men, and replacing every loss within hours. The 5,000 ships Heinrich Severloh saw that morning marked the beginning of the end, not because of the soldiers they carried, but because of what they symbolized, a nation that had transformed its entire economy into a weapon of war. Against that kind of power, courage and skill were no longer enough. D-Day proved that modern wars are not won by the side with the bravest soldiers, but by the side that can build more ships, train more men, and deliver more equipment than the enemy can destroy. If you want to hear more stories where industrial strength overcame tactical brilliance, subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and suggest which forgotten World War II story we should explore next.